Hey everybody, we are going to look at three more examples of solving two-step equations. These are going to be a little trickier and challenge you in another way. So let's take a look at our first one. Our first one is 10 minus 2/3, we're going to use p, equals 52. So in this one, there's quite a bit going on. Obviously, we're going to have something to do with the fraction, so we'll probably have something with the reciprocal happening. But it's negative, and then we've got this 10 going on, so it's quite a bit happening here that looks a little bit intimidating. So what I always try to do when I see something that looks intimidating is say, well, what do I know I can do with it? Well, one thing I know I can do with this problem is I know that 10 is right here, and I know that it's positive. And so I want to get rid of that 10. I know that I'm considering this, if we're going with the cows and chickens motif, we're going to move, the chickens over to the other side, the other chickens. So 10 counts as a chicken, so we're getting rid of it. And when you get rid of it, you always do the opposite of what it is. And I know it's positive. That's why I marked it positive right here. And so I do the opposite. I add the negative to it or subtract it, however you want to think about it. And if I do it to one side, I must do it to the other side. So 52 minus 10 gives me 42. And then this cancels out nice. And then you have negative 2/3 p. This really isn't that difficult if you remember what we did from the last lesson where we were just using our reciprocals. Whenever you have something that's multiplied by a fraction, if you multiply by the reciprocal, you can get rid of it and get the coefficient to 1, which is what we want. The trick with this one is you can't ignore the negative sign. You have to remember that negative sign. I'm going to highlight it. I think that'll look better. All right. So, and then once you acknowledge that negative sign, then you go, oh, well, that's got to be in the reciprocal. So negative 3/2. Reciprocal, you just flip it. And then whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other side. And so this whole side graciously cancels out. You have a negative times a negative, which gives you a positive. So you have p. And then 42 times negative 3 gives me negative 126. And then 42, think of that as 42 over 1. So 1 times 2 gives you 2. And then my answer is negative 63. All right. So that means that if I put this back in this equation, which we're going to do, I'm going to go 10 minus 2/3 times negative 63. That means that whatever I get from this should equal to 52. Well, let's check. 10 minus, 2/3. So I go 2 times 63. All right. That's going to give me 126. And then we're going to do 126 divided by 3, which is going to give me 42. And then you've got this interesting double negative thing going on here. You got negative 2/3 times negative 63. So a negative times a negative is going to give me a positive. So I have 10 plus 42, which when I simplify it, comes down to 52. So this is kind of an ugly problem, but very doable. Again, just make sure you're attacking it piecemeal and do the parts you can do. Have you guys noticed that on these equations that you're almost always adding and subtracting first, and then you're either dividing or multiplying next? That's kind of a theme with these. So let's take another problem here. All right, let's do negative 19 equals negative 3x plus 2. All right, so the variable's on the other side, which is okay. It can be wherever it wants to be. So let's just leave the variable there, and then let's get rid of the 2 because, it's the cows and chickens thing. We want the numbers all together, and we want the variables together. So let's subtract 2 from this side, like what I set up here. And because I did it here, I'm doing it right over here. So negative 19, think of this as negative 19 plus negative 2. So that would give me negative 21 equals negative 3x. And so you just look at what's being done to the x. Well, what's being done to the x is that it's being multiplied by negative 3. So we're going to divide both sides by negative 3 because that's the inverse operation, and that gets this coefficient down to 1. Remember, you got to include that negative in it because that's part of the deal. And then you have 21 divided by 3 is 7. Negative divided by negative gives you a positive. So your answer is x equals 7. If I put this into the equation, negative 19 equals negative 3 times 7 plus 2. Well, that would give me negative 21 plus 2, which is indeed negative 19. I get an equality statement, an identity, so I know this works. All right, last example here. N divided by negative 3 minus 2 equals negative 18. So lots of negatives on this one, so we just got to be careful, make sure we don't get tripped up. But again, very doable. So the first thing we got to look at is it looks like we should move this negative 2 over to the other side, all right? So I do that because I do that by doing the opposite. So if it's subtracting 2 or negative 2, you want positive 2. So we add 2. This is where a lot of people get in trouble, is they go negative 18 plus 2, and you get all kinds of crazy answers like 20. And so you got to remember, this is a negative 18. And we are adding 2 to it, which means that if we're on a number line and we're at negative 18, it means we're going to the right 2 spaces. Well, because the numbers are negative, the numbers appear to go down, right? Negative 17, negative 16. So that puts you at negative 16. All right, so that crosses off, and we got n equals negative 3. And then you have to look at this whole expression and say, okay, n is being divided by negative 3. So if it's being divided by negative 3, that means that what I want to do is I want to do the opposite, and the opposite of dividing by negative 3 is multiplying by negative 3. So these cancel, and you get n, and then negative 16 times negative 3 gives me a positive 48. And then if I put this in, I got 48 divided by negative 3. Oops, that was kind of strange. Divided by negative 3 minus 2 equals negative 18. Well, 48 divided by negative 3 gives me negative 16 because 48 divided by 3 is 16. Positive divided by negative is negative. And then minus 2 equals negative 18. Well, if both signs are negative, you just add them up, and 16 plus 2 is 18. You keep the common sign, which is negative. So negative 18 equals negative 18. We have an identity, and we have solved our problem.